Welcome to Inner Rhythm, the podcast about the creative process and following your inner voice. As always, we are broadcasting today from the historic home of artists Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, where, on each episode, we connect you with their legacy of artistic authenticity. I'm your host and the director of the PK House, Matthew Ward. On today's episode, we uncover the inner rhythm of singer-songwriter Robert Leslie. Raised between England and Amsterdam, Robert spent his young adulthood tramping throughout Europe, guitar in hand. In his early 20s, he used the last of his money to buy a one-way ticket to New York City, where he settled for a period of 10 years. Here, Robert earned his living busking in parks and subways. He gradually became a public fixture, a part of his community's daily routine. During his time in New York, Robert also produced 4 full-length albums and 2 EPs. Now residing in Seattle, Washington, Robert returns to New York to reflect upon his time here and on his music and music career thus far. We discuss the life of a busker, the questions a burgeoning young musician is faced with, and the struggle to balance one's authentic expression with market demands. Creating a sense of community, was that something that you were aware of while you were performing on the streets of New York?
Yeah, definitely, especially in the parks. I'd see a lot of the familiar faces. One really nice thing about playing in parks is that you'll get a lot of the kids, like the teenagers, like high school and up until 21, because they can't go listen to music in the clubs or anything like that. So, and it's free. You can go hang out and listen to music being played on the street. And I'm very proud to play for those guys. That's something that, because I feel like, like music venues should be like 18 plus, maybe tops. Like 21 plus is insane. Between the age of like 14 and 20, I feel like is when you're the most receptive to new music and you're really like going to become a fan of something. So to like shut the door on that seems nuts to me. But yeah, there's a lot of, a lot of the kiddies come through and I love them dearly. And, and there'll be kind of park regulars too, who don't necessarily come for the music. They're just like fixtures in the park, but they'll come and stop through. I was friends with this guy, Bill Warren, who was an Abe Lincoln impersonator at the time that I met him. And he used to, he was always in Washington Square Park. He was just such a regular. And he was like he's one of my closest friends now, but it started out with him just like listening to the song and be like, pretty good, and then he'd like go around and like round up all the other old time and like, Robert's playing, like, come, Robert. And then he'd like start matchmaking and he'd like introduce me to other musicians, like, Robert, this is Zach. He's a guitar player too. He loves Bob Dylan. I think he's doing the tour. And yeah, so this guy, he's like in his 70s now. And yeah, he introduced me to a lot of my closest friends that I have now, we called them the Guitar Boys.
Oh, wow.
And which is an all gender term, by the way, because there's a number of like female guitar boys now as well, and non-binary.
And did they become bandmates?
Yeah, actually. Zach, who Bill introduced me to, is in my band. We didn't get to play together on Saturday, but he's in North Carolina right now. He's like, he's touring with another band a lot. Although I think this time was just a family visit. But yeah, he's. The Guitar Boys are all growing up and these constellations keep expanding, right? But yeah, no, so like a lot of my social circles and colleagues and stuff has came about from playing out in public and this and that.
And now that you're in Seattle, do you find that there's a similar community? Are you playing in public as much in Seattle as you were in New York?
Yeah, in spite of it all, I kind of, when moving, I had this idea that, I maybe wanted to sort of adjust expectations, right? So I told myself, don't worry about the music thing right away. Maybe it's time to just get like a non-music job for a second. I like the idea of working on one of the boats. I'm friends with a lot of boat people here in New York, and I knew that Seattle was a good boat town. But kind of out of habit or inertia or I don't know what, like I just kind of started busking in Seattle anyway. And found that it worked just as well, if not sometimes better than New York. So
really,
and yeah, you got plugged right into the community of other people who do that, and then also just the other songwriters and musicians and things like that. And it was actually very, very seamless.
And you have performed in public in a lot of different cities, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the last great way to just get a reliable paycheck as a musician without being like well established and super well known. Except for like touring, but even touring is tough right now. Everything's getting more expensive, but people aren't necessarily making a lot more with gigs. It hasn't kept up with inflation. So, unless you got like a really impressive listener count on Spotify, like I know some people who get paid like $2,000 a month in Spotify royalties, and they can kind of like flow by on that. But I don't have that kind of listenership, and I don't know a lot of musicians who do. So really, like the one secret to like still making a living as a musician is just go out in public, bring a little amp or whatever, go to the people, and then,
It's a very different relationship with the audience. Something that strikes me about it is that inversely to one way that we are conditioned to listening to music, which is seeking out a specific...
Oh, it just went behind that. Wait, it's going to come on the other side.
Did you say a balloon?
Yeah, it's sailing across the lawn right now. There it comes on the other side of this tree.
Do you find symbols and do you look for symbols in life? I'm
sure
you see a lot of things when you're performing on the street.
I do look for symbols. Yeah, I do it in maybe like a tongue-in-cheek way. I wouldn't consider myself a true believer in signs. Although, call it agnostic, I guess, because I've had moments too that I'm like, okay. I do believe in flow states. I think you can get into like a kind of mystical state where you're much more attuned to what's going on around you, and you like meet people suddenly like in very unexpected ways. There's something about, yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. We were just talking earlier, myself and Bill, about that this is the place where Pollock was able to find his flow state, and that's actually the word that we used. And we were kind of talking about this idea of place and how an artist oftentimes needs to find their place where they can tap into that. For Pollock, he's somebody who moved around a lot, born in Cody, Wyoming, raised in California, ended up coming out with his brother to New York to study at the Art Students League with Thomas Hart Benton. But even Manhattan was not necessarily conducive to him producing the type of work and producing with the consistency that he needed to be. So he and Lee found this place, and they found Springs. And I think it's safe to say that this was both of their place. I know that you've just moved as well. You moved from New York to Seattle, but you've moved around a lot in your young life and career. Do you feel that you've found your place?
No, it switches all the time, really. I don't think I've ever... I haven't ever really had a fixed relationship to like a place that I really feel like this is home, this is the spot kind of thing. I moved around a lot when I was a kid too, so it was I was born in New York actually, and then before my first birthday we moved first to the Netherlands, and then around when I was 3 we moved to London, and then around when I was 8 I think we moved back to Amsterdam. And so all that moving around, I mean this is just my theory, but I think it just kind of gave me this feeling of like, okay, I'm not really anywhere. And also when I was in England I was the weird Dutch kid, when I was in the Netherlands I was the weird English kid. Here I'm the vaguely European dude with a strange accent. And I never really had that feeling of this is the spot. But New York City definitely drew me in completely. It's like this insane vortex. Not even, it's hard to know what part of me was being drawn to that, because I think a big chunk of it's just the human energy, which can be kind of a drain if you're actually trying to make stuff. Because there's just so much stuff going on. It's like, oh, what's the party tonight? What are we going to see? Who are we going to see? So I'd have to kind of like, whenever I wanted to really hunker down and make stuff and write music, I'd have to sort of shut the blinds and turn my phone off and not answer any of the stuff because I knew it would be too tempting and to want to go join the circus again. I really can't think of a single place that I ever really thought was like, this is a creative wellspring for me to be in this place.
But it sounds like you have nonetheless found that every place.
Yeah.
You're not one without inspiration.
No, but usually it's just if I can find myself a quiet room. And I need to be alone. That's one thing I've noticed too. I'm sort of shy when I'm making stuff. When I'm noodling on the guitar and trying to figure stuff out and trying to sing for some words for the first time, I don't like other people listening to me. So I like it when I can be all by myself.
Place doesn't have to be a geographic place or a fixed location.
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're describing is places, that state of mind that you have to get to.
Yeah, like a set of circumstance.
Yeah. Your upbringing sounds really interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? And even when you discovered music and when you started playing?
Okay. I wouldn't say that I had the most. I mean, I guess So yeah, I was raised mostly between the Netherlands and England, and my parents are English and Dutch, so I got a bit of both of that coming up. And the fact that I was born in the States was a fluke. They were just working there at the time. And maybe it was a tactical decision of theirs to have me in New York so I could get the passport. That's what I always assumed. But then when I asked my mom, she was just like, no, it just worked out that way. And then, honestly, I feel like I had a pretty normal type childhood, maybe a little bit isolated. I never really kind of came into confidence until my late teens. I was quite withdrawn and a little bit nerdy. I liked video games. I liked, I even dabbled in like coding and things like that and maths and whatnot. And then around the age of 16, I started being interested in girls, and I started being interested in poetry and beauty and the ineffable, I don't know. I think, falling in love for the first time, like I had this massive crush on a great friend who was, very much involved with the arts. Her dad was a musician and had this worldview that I found very invigorating and inspiring, and just learning to look at the world through like an aesthetic, romantic kind of point of view really changed my thinking. So I did a huge kind of 180 in my life around then, and sort of decided that I wanted to be some form of artsy type person. And I played a bit of guitar. I'd do some Beatles covers and some Bob Dylan stuff. But I wasn't set on music at all. But I did start busking very early, around age 17, I think. And it was really strictly just to get some extra pocket money. Most friends are getting random jobs in like ice cream shops or whatever. But I just figured I'd kill two birds with one stone, do some busking, get some extra cash, do it that way. And then after I finished high school, I was 18 or something like that. And I decided to set myself the challenge of just traveling around for the summer and seeing if I could support myself with just the street music thing. And so I gave myself some safety nets, right? I had some cash saved up. I could always call it home if I needed to, but it was just this little challenge that I said, let's see if I can do it with only the street music earning. And I pulled it off. It was terrifying. I think the first stop was in Brussels. I took the Eurobus or whatever it was called to Eurolines. That was it, to Brussels for like €5 or something like that. Cheapest bus I could find. And then seriously, I remember like getting out at the bus station in Brussels and being in such a panic that I wanted to I had this fantasy of like maybe if I like fell down these stairs, I could like break my foot and I could go home again without being suffering a setback. I was so terrified. And I'd set all these insane rules for myself. Like I had this, I didn't take a cell phone, for instance. I just told my parents, like, I'm going to write letters home. And I want to be all by myself for this. And so I'll just send a letter home every now and again to show you that I still exist. But aside from that, I'm going to be gone. You're just going to have to deal with that.
How did they like that?
They rolled with it, honestly.
Oh, wow.
They were just like, are you sure? Like, but whatever. Yeah, they were fine with it in the end.
Open-minded.
But I caved on that pretty quickly, to be honest. Within 3 days, I was feeling so homesick that I went to a payphone and called them off. So yeah, caved there. And, but pretty soon found my footing. And then by the time I got to Paris, I was feeling very confident and I was making buckets of money off of the Chinese tourists in Montmartre and feeling very suave. I almost immediately found like an older French mistress.
As one does.
She was like 34 years old and she completely joined in the fantasy. She was like, oh yeah, let's corrupt this little boy. It's all about it.
In a lot of ways, I feel that you have a story that is almost pre-Pollock-Krasner in a way. It is sort of this bohemian fantasy that I think a lot of people maybe thought was gone.
Well, a lot of it was play acting, right? If you're being honest, like it was me kind of trying to relive the books that I'd read and stuff. Like, I was a nerd of music, right? I've watched all the documentaries on the Beatles and Bob Dylan and like all these guys, Woody Guthrie, whatever. And so I had this picture of like what an artist's life is supposed to be, right? So at age 18, like the best thing I could come up with was just like, all right, let's you fake it till you make it kind of thing, right? Let's go out and jump in and see what happens.
When let's say that you were pursuing that idea that you had, right? And that kind of fantasy, but when it actually happens and it is your life, did it feel like play acting, as you say, while you were living it?
No, and that was the really cool thing because like the first trip that I made was just 3 months, very clear boundaries. Like I'd spend the summer doing that and then go to college. And so I went to college for a year and it was a complete disaster because I didn't pick anything that made sense. I went for the most vague thing I could think of because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So it was like liberal arts and sciences, which is like just everything.
Cast a wide net.
And the course was seriously laid out. It's kind of American style, I guess, that you just like pick different subjects and then eventually you could like choose a direction to go in once you knew what you wanted to do. But it was all very wishy-washy and I didn't make any friends at college. And then I picked the town that I went to, I picked out because my girlfriend at the time was going to college there. And then within months, she dumped me. So then that reason for being there was gone too. And I was really just thinking like, I'm just letting everyone take charge of my life over here. I'm not making my own choices. And then finally the last straw was when I had this health scare where they found I started having like hearing issues in one of my ears and I had like weird sort of nerve twitches and stuff going on. And they figured out there was like a little cyst or something growing in there. So they had to get that out. And in doing so, I lost my hearing in this ear. And, it was just kind of, yeah, it was a scary time, because it was like not a super dangerous surgery, but dangerous enough that they'd like tell you your odds, before you went on the operating floor, like, like 1 in 20 chance, you might not make it through, just so you know. So that's kind of freaky to hear as an 18-year-old.
Yeah. So you were 18 at this time.
Yeah. Maybe I just turned 19. But yeah, that all reinforced this idea that like life was happening to me without me taking charge of it, and that I could die, probably wouldn't, but I didn't think I would. But it's just like this idea, like I need to be doing what I want to be doing. So I dropped out of college, and I told everyone that I was just taking a break for a year, but I kind of was just hedging my bets on that one. I mean, I pretty much decided to run off. And so I did the same thing again, but just kind of indefinitely. I just hit the road with my guitar to become some kind of, roving art bum. And yeah, just kind of kept going and sort of went at it with even more manic energy than before, and a massive chip on my shoulder, to be honest. I was actually kind of terrible in those days. I was like shoplifting left and right. I was getting into all kinds of trouble. If anyone invited me to like their fancy house for drinks or anything like that, I'd make up with the silverware type thing. Not literally, but I was just, I was a little feisty. But, I started meeting people who were living in similar ways. I met some Irish fellows in Madrid who had like a wandering literary blues hobo type lifestyle going on. They seriously just had backpacks with no clothes in them, just only books, and like Steinbeck and stuff like that, and one change of clothes. And then they'd busk on the streets and they'd spend their money on two things, which was booze and an internet cafe where they'd go and listen to like music on YouTube. Uh-huh. And I met this guy, Will, in Paris, who was this completely bonkers Australian guy who was just, we would just instigate each other constantly, just come up with these fantasies, just like we'd be bored one night and it'd just be like, let's just stand on the side of the road and hitchhike in any random direction kind of thing, like, and come up with these just like kind of fantasies, little games for the night, escapades. It was like kid stuff. It was like, I finally got to be a teenager a little bit, go on these missions. And he and I wound up traveling together. And, we wound up in Spain and we were just winding each other up more and more and more. We got this thing going where we like tried to break into every castle and fortress that we could find. So we just like find ways to like climb over the walls at night and get into the gardens and stuff until we set off an alarm and had to like run off again. We'd just be drinking like cooking wine out of boxes. It was horrible.
In a lot of ways, this sounds like it sounds chaotic, right? It sounds like you're having fun, you're living life.
Road people shit, and you'll find these people all over the world, just people on the road, kind of getting into trouble.
And yet it turned into now 10 years or more of actually living life, doing the thing that you want to be doing, more consistently than most people are ever able to. So how did eventually, amidst all of this stability and consistency, you make your living as a musician? How did that develop?
Well, so the busking thing, it's interesting. It really started out as just a handy portable way for getting cash. I didn't see myself as someone who could be like a professional musician. I didn't think I had the character or the attitude for it or something like that. And I hadn't written many songs at the time. So I really I mostly played Beatles and Bob Dylan songs, some newer stuff like Radiohead, The Tallest Man on Earth, that kind of thing. But I didn't really play originals when I was out in public. And what I wanted to do was, I fancied myself more of a writer at the time. I thought we'd go off and write novels, which we wound up doing. We once we got as far south as we could go in Europe and the winter was coming in, we crossed over into Morocco. And we both set about writing a little novels over there. Mine was a complete Jack Kerouac ripoff, of course.
I was going to ask, when you said that you weren't songwriting, that struck me as odd because songwriting, I would say, it's such a strength of yours. And your songs are so poetic and beautifully written. But then it makes sense you were planning on being a writer.
I mean, I had some stuff in those days. I think, over the course of when I was traveling, I put out 2 little EPs on my Bandcamp, and it was 5 songs each. And that's all I got out of it. I think I kind of started writing more songs towards the end of that traveling phase because I was getting a lot of encouragement on the music front. And even in Madrid, I met some people who were in the music industry who took an interest in me. So that kind of made me think oh, okay, maybe I got something to do. So yeah, and we did Eastern Europe. In the summer of 2012, we were over in Prague and in Slovakia, Czech Republic and stuff like that. And that was That was a fun phase. We caught a ride from Berlin to Slovakia with these German hippies who had like an old fire truck from the 70s. And they were all sleeping in the fire truck, and we were kind of stowaways, so we slept under the fire truck in our sleeping bags, like getting oil dripped on us and stuff. But I thought that was just lovely, you know, like going through the cornfield and stuff. And I got some songs out of that phase. And I was also going through a nice turbulent, unrequited, not completely unrequited, but impossible love affair, which I also got some songs out of that too.
As an artist, do you think you draw more from the positive or the negative, the love or the unrequited love?
Oh, I've always been a wistful bastard. Yeah. I don't think I've ever managed to write anything that's just purely positive. There always has to be a wistful twist.
Yeah, your music has that wan smile.
Yeah, even when I do the animal songs, you know, when I get goofy, it's still about tragic animals. They've all got their predicaments, you know.
But you seem pretty happy now. Is that going to be a problem for you?
That's always been a thing with me. I tend to be a pretty smiley guy, or at least, you know, when I'm in social settings, you know, I default to
Yeah.
a little bit silly.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes for a very, probably very jarring and strange experience for people who come to see my shows, you know, because they've maybe listened to my music that's recorded, which can be quite introspective and a bit solemn at times. And then they catch me on stage and I'm just kind of grinning like an idiot and making jokes about weasels and snakes and things like that. So, you know, maybe that's something that it's not the most consistent thing, but whatever.
It's sort of like a Townes Van Zandt, though. He would. Do you listen to him at all?
Sure.
He would crack the silliest jokes between the saddest songs you've ever heard.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it's two very different headspaces to be sitting in your room writing songs about feelings and stuff like that. And, you know, I try and get poetic with it. I try and find like the way to express what I'm thinking and like, you know, with like a certain style, right? So I'm not always saying things directly. I'm kind of like dancing around them and alluding to them. And I've got my chords that are slightly vague, you know, some major sevenths in there. And yeah, try and create that little air of like mystique, you know. But then when I'm on stage and I've got an audience in front of me, I'm usually in a great mood, and I've likely had a beer or two before the show, and I'm seeing my friends in the front row, and it just doesn't occur to me to be like the serious poet guy. You know? I'm just like I'm sharing the stuff that I made, but I don't feel solemn. I don't feel like, I don't want to be a closed book in that situation.
And speaking of spaces, I mean, two very distinct spaces: the spaces where you create, and then the space where you perform. Two different spaces. You can feel different in both spaces. Are you the same? Is the performer and the writer, are those different people?
It's completely different. Yeah, performing and writing is two really separate acts. And I think you see that a lot in music too, that people often if they're able to skip live performances entirely, they will. You know, like the Beatles, for instance, they stopped touring and they became strictly a studio band and like, you know, lived as composers.
Is there a person with him?
Yeah, there's a couple of people walking around.
There.
But yeah, so I think the job of being like a writer, composer, songwriter, whatever, that's one job, and being a performer is another job. And I think it's a fluke of the time that we live in that those two are conflated so much. You got the singer-songwriter thing, and it's really only since the 60s that became the norm. Even in the 60s, like maybe later than that, it became the norm. And before that, you'd have the composer and you'd have the performer, and it was like two separate jobs.
Do you relate more to one than the other?
No, but I think the two roles do kind of get confused and jumbled in a way. Yeah, I think there really is like a slight. It's two different people, you know what I mean? That's why you get that weird confusion on stage where I'm like all smiley and bantering and then playing these sometimes slightly intense songs.
It's two different people. Are they two different songs?
You could say that. I mean, you can play a song as many different types of ways as you like.
Do you try to
But no,
capture?
because the songs are kind of people too. You know what I mean? Like every song is its own little thing that walks off by itself.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and honestly, like, I think a good litmus test for a song is like, can someone else cover the song and put their own meaning into it? And a lot of my songs don't pass that test, by the way, but I think the best ones do. They tend to be, the ones that people listen to and they think like, I want to sing that song. Like that's when you've done a good job, because that means it's walking off by itself. It's like become its own entity.
Has your trajectory as a performer followed along similar lines, do you think, as your trajectory as a songwriter? Or are they kind of moving in different ways at different rates?
I think. Well, I think that performing and songwriting is something that I kind of learned in parallel with each other. And it actually took a long time for me to get really more intentional about it. And really think about both in terms of, the craftsmanship behind it. I think I started thinking about the songwriting part a little bit earlier than that, mostly thanks to my friend Perry Margalev, he produced my last album, but he and I met in 2015. And he gave me a lot to think about when it came to just the craft of writing songs. He had all these interesting stories about, one that stuck with me was the Muzak test. It's like, you got a good melody when you can turn the song into elevated music and it's still a good song. That kind of made me think like, okay, melody, right? Like every song needs to have a sense of melody, or at least it doesn't have to. Obviously, you can make a song without a strong melody, but I decided that like, no, I do want my songs to have strong melodic sense. Thinking about chord changes, arrangements, the way it's sung. And then it took me a long time to really start thinking about stagemanship. And that's still one of my weaker points, I think, to be honest. Just the whole, because that's almost like the role of an actor, you know what I mean? That's a whole separate thing. If you look at a David Bowie concert, for instance, you can see how because he studied it to be a mime, or he studied mime under Lindsay Kemp, and you can see that whole, he does all those tricks, and he's got this amazing sense of presence on stage, and like his body is very, he's got all the gestures and things like that. And I never took that very seriously for the longest time. I grew up with this idea that like, the best songwriters are the ones who are just like honest and naive and direct and speak straight from the heart, and all the artifice of it like just seemed like fake to me. But that's because I couldn't see that even like a Bob Dylan, he was putting on an act, right? He was a Jewish kid from Minnesota who was pretending to be this little hillbilly minstrel boy. And so I think I somehow missed that, he was also in his head, like calculating, like, what is the audience seeing right now? What are they getting? What am I bringing across? So that's a whole other facet of it that, there's a lot of different pieces that go into doing this stuff, right?
Yeah. And when we last left young Robert, he was with some Germans in an old fire truck. I would think that when you're in all of these different places with so many different people, different countries, you must adopt different roles on a regular basis. Or did you not?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I played around with all kinds of different roles. Actually, when we were with the Germans when we went out east, like the little tangent that we were on was that we were traveling just wearing suits, which is also more play acting, right? But we had this idea that we wanted to do like the kind of old-timey suitcase and a suit type hitchhiking adventure. Yeah. And we just both had these raggedy suits with like 2 white shirts and like suitcases, not even backpacks, but suitcases. It was just the most silly thing. And the funniest part was that we wound up at this, it was like a rainbow gathering. I don't know if you've heard of those. It was like a hippie gathering. And, you know, just hippies from all over Europe gathering in the woods, living naturally, you know, gardening and eating vegan food and very communal and collective and stuff. And everyone's like mostly naked. And there we were in our suits. And a lot of the hippies completely misunderstood it. You know, I got some hostile reactions. You know, you'd be sitting at the main fire and they'd be like, "Brother, don't you think you should be getting back to the office now?"
Probably the least
like,
corporate
no,
person imaginable.
It's like a Blues Brothers thing, man. Like, we're not trying to. It's not office suit. It's like old timey traveling hobo suit. You know what I mean? Like, brother, no. Yeah. Well, that's pretty good. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of just trying out different stuff, and you know, if I'm being honest, I didn't take myself at all seriously in those days, and and you know, maybe that's for the best because I was trying things out. But with the music stuff too, I wasn't thinking seriously about the craft and the music and all that, or like my career, like how am I going to become a career musician. I was completely living in the moment. Like I'd been so depressed in the years leading up to when I left, and then when I got out, it was so kind of like I broke out of jail kind of thing. So I was just giddy and running around like a maniac and making a mess of things and not thinking about the future at all.
Was your decision to then go to New York, was that something you thought about for a long time?
Yeah, well, so I did have this idea in the back of my head. So I spent almost 2 years traveling around. And I was getting a little bit tired of the routine of just always going from place to place. And I did have this anchoring to kind of sit down and work on stuff. And yeah, I did want to see if I could have a go at sort of making a career out of music and doing a thing with it. And in my mind, New York was the place to go for that. Probably also, again, the Bob Dylan thing. That's where he went to. It just had this natural gravitational pull. It's like, well, if you want to do something, then that's like the center of the universe kind of thing. But I was very kind of, you know, I wasn't going there with a super strong sense of purpose. It was really just to try it out. I thought I got a one-way ticket over there. I thought I'd try it out for a while, see if I liked it, see if it made sense. And then, yeah, I got sucked right into the vortex and I wound up living there for over 10 years.
So it was 10 years at that point in your life. That's the one place that you lived the longest.
Yeah.
Or maybe now still New York is the one place you live the longest. What do you think the qualities were about New York outside of the preconceived notions and what we all sort of think about New York as a place of dream fulfillment, but those day-to-day qualities that made you stay?
Just the human energy of New York is so good. It's just the mess, you know, just the cheerful mess of it all. And, you know, I really think New York's got this reputation for being rude or whatever, but, you know, it's warm. It's a very warm-hearted city. And I think you kind of have to like people to be there because there's so many people all squashed together. And everything else about the city is so inconvenient. You know, everything's constantly janky and stinky and covered in trash and nothing works and the rent's too high and this and that. But so that's the one reason that you want to be there is the people. And that's so good about it. You know, just everywhere that you go, people are cool. People are really cool in New York. You know, you can just take the subway and look around you and be like, all right, these motherfuckers, they know what's up. And so you got the ideas churning on you. You got all these enticing little ladders and alleyways everywhere, right? You know that in that building something very fancy is happening right now, and in that building over there's someone famous recording something. You know, you have this sense of like everything is happening around you, even if you're not necessarily a part of it. Like this is the place where the stuff is happening, and that's very addictive. And you know, on a personal level, I met some really great friends, and yeah, there's something about the kind of, you get this calendar going in New York that there's always something interesting going to happen about a month from now. Like it's hard to leave. So yeah, I don't know. And it was very gratifying to be able to sustain myself and to keep up that challenge of, can I keep going? Can I keep doing something new? Can I get something better going on? What are my opportunities? This and that. I had some nibbles from music industry people too, from a major label side actually, and I pretty much rejected that completely, which might have been foolish in retrospect. But I think it might have been one of those Gen X hangovers in my attitude of like authenticity and whatever. But everyone that I talked to from like Universal and Sony and stuff, they all had this kind of a little bit of this atmosphere of like, let's change up your clothes a little bit. Let's work on these songs a little bit, make them a bit more catchy. You should talk to this producer. He's like a hip hop producer, kind of thing. And all that stuff kind of gave me like an icky feeling. I was like, no, I want to be Bob Dylan. I don't want to be these guys. Like, so I was just waiting for like the right type of collaboration to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of what ifs attached to that phase of my life, like those first years in New York.
So that happened pretty early on, you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just the right age for it, right? I mean, they like to get them young. And also that was kind of the tail end of when the music industry was really seeking out talent in that way, because that's pretty much stopped. Like right now, the majors find people after they've blown up on TikTok and sort of got their own momentum going. But at the time, in 2013, you still had A&R people going to the little clubs and like, sorting it out. And I was like a 20-year-old kid with an English accent and floppy hair and my little worn-out guitar and stuff. So yeah, I got a number of people sort of approaching me as like a marketable commodity, and I didn't want to be a commodity. So,
and you refer to these as what ifs, but would you have changed anything looking back now?
I don't know. I mean, as time goes on, like you have to be honest with yourself about who you are and what could have been and what. So I'm not upset about the choices that I made, or at least not when it comes to like career stuff. Because I'm happy with my life now, and I'm happy with the choices that I made and the work that I made. But at the same time, I can see how certain parts of my attitude are maybe a little bit closed-minded too, because you can take a thing like that and take the bull by the horns and steer things too.
And do you feel that where you are now with your artistry and who you are as a person, you would be able to create that balance and walk that line?
Maybe. I mean, I think a big part of it too is just I'm thinking now a little bit more in terms of like, how do I keep the gig going for as long as I can, right? Like, how do I keep living this type of life into my 30s and 40s and 50s without having to, give it up and get a real job? And I wasn't thinking about that at all at the time. I thought everything was going to happen by magic. I was completely living in the present. And I think I sometimes let perfect be the enemy of the good. But that's okay.
That is a really interesting, I think, really valuable line. How did you come to that sort of idea, that sometimes good or done is better than perfect?
I mean, I don't know. It's like, it's almost a cliche, isn't it? It's like,
but to feel it, you could say a cliche, but it doesn't resonate until you have the experiences that make it felt instead of heard.
Well, listen, I'm not trying to come across as if I've got like some regret about all this and like remorse. And,
no, yeah.
I just think it's interesting because I don't really think back on those times a lot. We're having this conversation and I'm kind of treading those footsteps again in my head. And, now that I'm in my 30s, I'm thinking quite a lot more about like, how do I make a living doing this?
Yeah.
How do I support myself doing this? what if I want kids someday? You know, what if I
Yeah.
want a house someday? And so I'm thinking back on those moments back then and thinking like, okay, if I'd been a little bit more, you know, if I just sucked up to these guys a little bit more, if I just accepted a few moments that I felt like maybe it didn't pass my little inner purity test of how I wanted it to happen. But, you know, on the other hand, maybe I would have had like, if I could have built up some kind of career start from that and followed it through, you know. So I'm just thinking back, like, interesting.
And to kind of connect to Pollock's career again, because something jumped out to me there. He had one of those moments where, as much as any artist could ever think to be, and more than any artist ever had, he became a celebrity.
Well, it was right place, right time a lot of it too, wasn't it?
Yeah. And with that celebrity, a lot of pressure. Also the right place, right time for the United States as a whole.
How do you feel about the whole angle of like the US government kind of pushing Pollock 2 as an answer to like Soviet realism, or Soviet, what's it called?
Yes, socialist realism.
Was that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he almost became like a political chess piece too, right? It was like, this is the American art. We're going to push this everywhere.
I think in some ways that is the case, and I think in some ways it was the case inadvertently. And I think for somebody for that whole generation, if we're going to call them the abstract expressionists, and even a little bit of the generation before, it was always the government that allowed them to be full-time artists, dating back to the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. Artists like de Kooning, Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, Stuart Davis. This government program allowed them to be full-time fine artists for the first time in their career. Somebody like de Kooning was a commercial illustrator until the WPA provided the consistency to work as an artist. So that's where it starts with the government.
You had the bloody CIA putting on gallery shows internationally and stuff like that, right? It was like, it went pretty far.
And then at the same time, Pollock is he is a socialist.
Yeah.
So
it's funny.
It's complicated. But then you have sort of the heart of that also is, you know, Clement Greenberg, the art critic, writes this article, Avant-Garde and Kitsch. And he's positioning Norman Rockwell as the villain, more or less, in this essay, saying that the United States of America promotes an artist like Norman Rockwell in the same way that the Soviet Union uses their artists as propaganda. So kind of positioning Pollock as the answer to American propaganda. I think that whatever the machinations, I would say that I don't think that it was manifest in his work.
But, you know, this all comes back to this floats back to what we were talking about, and, you know, just about maybe what the institutions around you expect of you, and what's going to get pushed out to the forefront. And you have to have like a you know, to get to the level of fame of someone like Pollock or something like that, you need to have this perfect alignment where like the person's vision aligns with what the world is trying to put into its flow and send out.
So many different forces are determining that, right? And sometimes the artist is the least of those. Yeah.
And so it's like, so when I was in New York in 2013, this was right when the early 2000s folk thing was sort of cresting and about to smash, because the Mumford and Sons were big. I don't like Mumford. And there was a lot of that stomp and holler, Williamsburg, you know, Starbucks playlist shit going on. And, you know, so that's why these guys were taking an interest in me. And that's also why I was so kind of iffy about the whole thing, because I sort of like, you guys are the motherfuckers who are ruining this thing. You know what I mean?
And you recognize that there was a bit of a misinterpretation going on.
Right.
It's not very flattering to be
liked
for reasons that you are not trying to embody.
Yeah. But, you know, at the same time, because you do want to be of your time. So that was another consideration too. What I really wished, like what I really wanted, was to live in a world where you could turn on the radio and hear a song like Mr. Tambourine Man for the first time. You know what I mean? Like imagine that, you're driving late at night on the highway, you hear this new song, it's like, oh, never heard anything like that before. And it's just, it's like a symbolist poem in the style of Rimbaud with a guitar on top of it. Like, and that was the kind of depth that I really wished there would be. And that's what I was trying to do. But at the same time, I was terrified of this idea, like, what if I'm just like a guy like trying to be Van Gogh in the 1950s? You know what I mean? When everyone else has moved on, like, what if I'm trying to use a medium that's not current anymore?
When you mentioned the radio and something, and a way of experiencing music that's becoming less and less common in an age of streaming, where we do, you know, there might be a curated for you playlist that there's some surprises in, but for the most part, we are dictating the music we are listening to without surprise, where we're not coming across music.
Yeah.
And the way that you play, and I think one of the strengths of busking is that somebody like myself can hear your music without, it's not something that I was looking for or that I would know to look for, but it's sort of like a radio that's just in life. And that's how I heard your music for the first time in the subways of New York. And I thought, my gosh, I love that. And I haven't heard something like that. And before the train came, and thankfully I had enough time before the train came. I knew that I loved the music, and you had albums there with you, so I was able to get one and keep listening to your music. There's something of, I think, great value to not always dictating our own experiences, whether it's with visual art or music, where it sort of just happens to us or presents itself to us.
Yeah.
Do you think for that reason, wherever your career takes you, would you ever give up public performing?
I think I'd always like it to be a part of what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do like it, especially for that reason that you just described, where it's just, you get a chance to show people something that they wouldn't usually hear. And yeah, no, it's very nice for that, and I think I'll keep on doing it. Yeah.
And you're also, in addition to live performances, you're a recording artist as well.
Yeah.
And you recently released a new album. How was that process? How did it compare to previous releases?
Yeah, so that one was really, I took that one very, very, very seriously. So I started writing that in 2019, like late 2019. And then COVID hit as I was still writing the album. And COVID had a very, very big effect on me, because it completely, you know, I couldn't do any of the stuff that I could usually do. Like, obviously there's no busking or anything like that going on. And yeah, just because of various bureaucratic reasons, like I wasn't able to get any of the pandemic assistance either. So I was like kind of in a bind. And yeah, and so I had I had a little bit of cash from this crowdfund thing that I'd done to make the record. But the pressure was on, you know what I mean? And having that pause in my life, not being able to perform, not being able to do anything, the government telling me that I can't do it, you know what I mean? That triggered kind of a crisis for me. Like I got very, you know, I got very worried all of a sudden about my future, which is a shock to me, because I'd spent like my entire life up to that point just resolutely ignoring the future completely, just living in the moment. And because I had to sit down and like sort of live with myself for a second, I had to be like, you know what, shit, like I'm not getting any younger. I need to figure out how to actually be able to keep doing this and like sustain myself. And which is hilarious, because I'd been ignoring that. I obviously, you know, I've got parents. They'd call me up and they'd be like, so what's the plan? Like you're just gonna keep playing in the subway then, or what's going on? And I'd be like, no, I'm having fun. shut up. This is good. I'm enjoying life. But that moment really kind of put the brakes on everything. And so I really thought, okay, I need to build myself a ladder to pull myself out of this hole kind of thing. So I worked very hard on the songs, and put as much of myself in as I could. And then I also I made demos and I sent them to every single person that I'd ever met over the years. I dug up all the old emails and phone numbers. Everyone who was even slightly music industry adjacent, I hit them up. I was like, here's this my new thing. Like, what do you think? Can you think of anyone who'd want to hear this? Can we do anything with this? And so this fellow Perry Margalev, he's a producer, and he'd come across my music in 2015 when his assistant saw me play in the subway. And she picked up one of my CDs and brought it to Perry, who lived in Long Island at the time. It's like, Perry, listen to this. And Perry's like, I'm not listening to that. I don't trust CDs. Everyone's auto-tuning their shit. Nope, just bring them over. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I went to visit him and we hung out at the studio and we became friends. And we never wound up working together at the time. But then, yeah, when I sent him the new demos, he gave him a listen and he was just like, yep, this is it. Let's do something with this. And then a few other people in the industry too also had a really, really positive response to it. A fellow that worked at BMI Publishing and some people who were kind of label adjacent, so the fellow who did marketing at Columbia Records and stuff like that. All of them were kind of old timers. They sort of jumped on and it became this very sweet kind of lockdown Zoom call thing. Yeah, my girlfriend Ariel called it the boom Zoom. It would just be me on a Zoom call with like three older guys who all got the boomer angle going on. And they were such sweeties, and they really helped me out. And Perry especially really kind of took charge of the project, and he brought in some just incredible session players like Tony Garnier, who was Bob Dylan's touring bassist and has played on every one of Dylan's records since the 80s. And then also Scarlett Rivera, who's the violinist for On Desire. You know, if you know that song Hurricane, she's the violin player on that. She came and played on the record. And then Jake Sinclair, who produces Weezer and Panic at the Disco, he doing the keyboard parts and everything like that. So these really kind of heavy hitters, big names.
Yeah.
And we put in a massive effort to try and get some label backing on that one too. But yeah, it was extremely chaotic at the time with COVID going on, and yeah, it kind of fell to pieces at the end with the label stuff and the management and so on. But great record came out of it, and I've had a really good response to it.
And there's another, as I've sort of seen you putting the record out there, right, on social media, that is another public, another way to interact with the public. How do you view your relationship with people digitally? Is that something that you value, or do you resist it?
Yeah, the marketing part's the worst of all. That's really the Achilles heel. I absolutely hate promoting myself. I really despise it. And you know, I was really one of those. I really just always thought that I could, if I just wrote the songs and did my best and kept going for a while, then eventually I get to a point where like someone else would do that stuff for me. You know what I mean? Someone else would put up the posters and buy the Instagram ads or whatever the hell you have to do. But those days are over. Yeah, now even more so than before. It's really kind of ridiculous. Like, it's TikTok and Instagram Reels. That's how you do it now.
But you've done some beautiful sort of music videos that you put out, even in short form or as reels. And the cinematography and the aesthetic and the storytelling in
I've
those
had to learn how to
fantastic.
do it, right? Like just like everyone else. But I really wish I didn't have to do it. It's so painful for me. Like just to be your own videographer and stuff like that too. There's something that just feels so wanky about it. I don't know.
So you're making those music videos yourself as well?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
no. So yeah, it's to make one of those videos in the woods. I'll go out into the woods with a little GoPro and a bloody tripod and a microphone, and I'm setting it all up, just like okay, and then you just have to pretend. Got that?
See, those are the turkeys, and it's always these two.
Beauty. Wow, look at
Dinosaurs.
these guys. Hello. Gobble gobble. That's awesome.
Great neighbors.
Right. And no one ever thinks to have a little snack over here. You haven't had anyone having...
2 days of the year you're allowed to do that, but very limited.
I hate to say it, they look tasty.
They're enormous. I chased one of them the other day, actually. I was wondering what it would do. I don't know if it would come at me or go away. It ran away.
Like a sloth.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know if they're aggressive or what. I guess the way to find out isn't to chase them. I guess you could Google it. But I was just curious. And it's always these two. One of them, though, there was a headless one out there a couple weeks ago.
Oh dear.
And I don't know what ate its head. What would eat a head and not the body?
Yeah, good question.
Man. That's all I can think of.
Extremely strong cat.
Do we cut the moment or we keep it rolling?
No, keep it going.
So yeah, marketing. Yeah. I will say, I kind of like TikTok better than the other ones so far.
Why?
TikTok's surprisingly friendly.
The users?
Yeah. Yeah, the people in the comments are nicer. And there's something quite forgiving about the, well, I mean, I know that's not entirely true because there's the pressure of like the more regularly you do it, the better it is or whatever. But it's nice how on TikTok it's completely normal for a post to just absolutely bomb for no reason that anyone knows. You can go to the most popular TikTok creators pages and there'll just be a bunch of ones that only have like a few hundred views.
It's more moment based.
Yeah, it's just like whatever works, and whatever doesn't, whatever. So there's less pressure in that sense. I remember when I was with Instagram and Facebook too back in the day, there was always this feeling of like disappointment when a post didn't do well and you didn't get as many likes as the other one. You'd just be like, oh, what did I do wrong? And yeah, TikTok is just such a bewildering, mysterious ecosystem, and it's just purely just sheer monkey brain, you know. It's just like whatever is hypnotizing the kids gets sent out to more kids to keep them, you know, keep them hypnoptized.
And
Which
will
is
you
insane,
do
but-
different content or the same content on all the platforms?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like I'm shocked that because it took a long time to convince me to get on TikTok because a bunch of people were telling me to do it, and you know, people were telling me in like 2020 already, and I was like, oh, the children's dancing app. Come on,
Musical.
Moi, the artiste on that? No, I don't think so. I slowly started dipping my toes in the water, and then I was really surprised to see that like you can actually, if you get into very esoteric little subjects, like it will kind of find its niche somehow. So you totally can get like you know, you can get very specific and super brainy and pretentious if you want to, and artsy, and it'll somehow reach the artsy people who know what you're talking about. Which was cool to find out. And then also, I mean, that's the other thing. I thought that I had to do all the cringy like trends and things like that in order for it to work. I thought I'd have to like use the formats and stuff, but nah, you can just straight up put clips of you playing songs on there with like a little story. It helps to have a hook, you know. So like the one that did well was I did a cover of this like almost 500-year-old song about a frog who wants to marry a mouse, but first he has to murder 3 people in order to get the hand of the mouse. And I think all that combined was kind of very, very good for TikTok because, you know, you can just lead in with like, this is a 475-year-old song about a murderous frog. And then that gets you past the 5-second mark, you know what I mean? It's like, all right, let's see what that sounds like.
It's relatable,
Yeah,
I think, for all of us.
yeah. But, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, I do. all this stuff is very kind of painful for me. Like I really, in an ideal world, I'd be the guy, you know, I'd be the slightly withdrawn hermit artist guy, and you know, having a chat like this is fine. I enjoy it. That's good. Writing my songs good. Playing them on stage, very nice. But then that act of like getting on your little internet soapbox and trying to get everyone interested in you, that's like, it just feels excruciating to me.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't really, there's so many artists where that is sort of an unnatural thing. Again, our setting, I don't think neither Pollock nor Krasner would have taken very well to that. Pollock,
I mean, can you imagine Kurt Cobain, like, you know,
you wouldn't
getting
want him
on
to.
TikTok quick, like, hey guys, like, I got this new song for you that I really want you to hear. Like, please come to our show next week. Like, it's just so kind of.
Yeah. It's not it wouldn't be in the spirit of who they are as an artist. So that's interesting.
But I think but that's also, because that's something that I grew up with, and I think it was like a 90s thing to have this sense of authenticity, right? Being completely untainted by commercial interests. I'm not in it for the money. I'm not in it for the fame. I'm not in it for the attention. I'm just an artist. This is what I do. This is what I make. Mm-hmm. But at the time, you still had like an ecosystem which could get behind people like that and then do the work of getting them out. And now it's just become so completely understood that everyone needs to be crass, commercial, out there, getting their opportunity. Like you can be an artist that everyone loves and relates to and do a McDonald's commercial, and all your fans will just be like, yeah, get that bread, you know, like it's fine. Like you do what you have to do. So I don't know. It's very normalized and forgiven that everyone's just kind of out there trying to get eyes on themselves. But I think it's messed up.
I was going to inquire if there would be a way to replicate the spirit of busking on a social media platform, but I suppose not, because when you're busking, you usually choose a metropolitan area where the people are going to be there, and your social media could either be a small town.
It kind of is like busking in a way. I mean, you're trying to insert yourself into someone's day in a clever way. So maybe, you know, the equivalent of going to like a busy intersection would be like choosing the right topic to do your video about, right? Or the right, you know, I know hashtags aren't so big anymore, but just like whatever's kind of, you can find ways into people's feeds by like going through like adjacent interests or whatever.
That's really interesting. So all of this considered, you know, the ecosystem that you exist in, that you're working in many ways it's fractured. There is an age-old pressure on you to fulfill yourself as an artist, but also to sustain yourself in society. Yeah. How are there methods you've developed or approaches that have allowed you to do the two?
Busking. That's it. I mean, that's the beautiful grounding thing about it. It's like this literally, because you've got this completely insane, bewildering world of like trying to convince robots to hypnotize children for you so that you can maybe get 0.3 cents every time someone listens to your song. And you're just taking part in this just insane kind of pandemoniac tech billionaire world where, you know, the CEO of Spotify is worth 10 times as much as Paul McCartney. Kind of like it's very alienating and bizarre, and it feels sometimes so far removed from like why you got into it in the first place. Then you go out into a park and play for whoever happens to be there, and it's like, hey, I like that song, here's $20. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the minstrel shit. That goes back to the Middle Ages. It's real, it's grounding, it's like completely in real life. You don't need any phones for it, which I like. Am I allowed? I don't think so. I think a lot of people feel this way that I do. Like, especially the people who make the shit, like the artists, they really don't like being slaves to this whole infrastructure that's set up by people who've got nothing to do with what they're doing. Like, if you're an author, you can get mad at your publishing house, right? But at least they know the industry. They know the difference between the two authors that you know, they're like, part of the same club. And yeah, they're the money people. So sure, the visionaries always hate the money people, whatever. And you know, musicians could get mad at their labels or whatever. But now you're in this place where it's sort of, you're not even fighting against people anymore. You're fighting against an algorithm. And you know, and then you could switch it around and say like, well, the algorithm is just trying to give people what they want, but not really, because it's like popcorn, it's like candy, you know, it's like whatever makes your brain go,
And busking removes all of that. You're asking somebody to, I mean, if they want to hear and listen, they stop, you're outdoors, and they remain in the space. Do you have favorite top moments from your busking experiences that stay with you?
The pandemic was pretty special. That was because like us buskers, we were like the only show in town pretty much. Like there was no other live music. So that really kind of, that became like a very special thing. I was playing in Tompkins Square Park pretty regularly. And get big crowds all sitting around very politely socially distanced, you know. And they bring out some drinks or to-go food and stuff. And that was a really nice feeling of communal spirit and energy. And I mean, it's New York too, so there's so many like wacky stories. You know, like once I was playing in the subway and then this guy walked up to me completely stark naked, not a stitch of clothing on. He was like, bro, could I get like all the money in your guitar case? Like I need to buy clothes right now. It's just like, dude, you're gonna go out at like 10 p.m. naked in the wintertime with just a handful of single dollars in search of a clothing store right now.
You were in a similar position once yourself.
Right, yeah, well, I had some clothes.
So that is something that we skipped over actually, is the particular circumstances of how you came to New York. Would you mind repeating that story?
Yeah, so before I came to New York, I was living in Madrid. And yeah, I was really theatrical in those days. I mean, I was already talking about like this whole thing of like going around Eastern Europe, like wearing a suit and with my little suitcase and stuff. And I was making all these gestures all the time, which is, you could call it pretentious and annoying, which I'm sure many people would think. But you know, fuck them. And fuck me too at the time. I was a little twerp, but it's cool. Sorry. You can cut that out. But yeah, so I was living in Madrid at the time, and the day before I left for New York, I decided to get my laundry done. And yeah, I kind of spaced out for a second, or I got talking to someone, or I don't know what, but then I turned around and my bag of clothes had been stolen. So I had to fly from Madrid to New York with literally just the clothes on my bag. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so the other part of it was that I paid for my plane ticket with just a giant bag of coins that I'd earned busking. I actually went to the airport a few days in advance, and I was like, I want to go to New York. I want a one-way ticket. Like, I don't care when, just like within the next few weeks. And here's my money. And yeah, they got a kick out of it at the airport too. They thought it was pretty funny.
And I mean, since then, we've already mentioned New York became your home for a really long time. You're in Seattle now, but you're visiting once again. And you mentioned something to me earlier that I thought was really nice, which was that, you know, all these people who used to remember you from this spot or that spot are seeing you again. And that when you're out there performing on a daily basis, out in public, that you sort of become a part of the public space, that you become a fixture. What is that experience like for you to become a part of the landscape and a part of people's daily routine?
It's a huge honor. It's really nice to feel like you're part of like a community in a whole, especially when it's bloody New York City, you know, that's pretty cool. And I didn't really realize this until actually I more or less decided to leave. And then I started getting all these messages and stuff, and even just random people on the street would stop me and be like, "Hey, I hear you're leaving. Like, that's gonna suck. Like, the park's not gonna be the same without you." And that was like really crazy to me to think that like they saw me as like this sort of element of the park or the furniture of New York kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's the little yodeling bastard who hangs around the trains and the parks and sing. So that was very, very wholesome and sweet. And a big surprise to find out just how many people were aware of me, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. And now I assume you're making new relationships with new places.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I'll keep doing that for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I moved to Seattle, I really wasn't sure if I'd continue doing the busking thing as regularly. I wasn't sure if it would work, but surprise, surprise, like I'm still at it. And starting to have similar experiences over there too, that starting to see the same people here and there and get plugged into this and that little community. And it's nice.
Nice. And so now we're here in another very particular space. A creative space, a space that, you know, all sorts of different people come through. And we're very happy to have you in this space today. And this is a different sort of experience. We would love to have you play in the studio. But maybe it's more like your experience in your own room where you write or create, because you won't have an audience today. It'll just be you in the space. But would you like to play a few songs with the space?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thanks, Robert.